My friends, I want to tell you about the day Nelson Mandela nearly destroyed everything he would come to stand for. The year was 1952. He was 34 years old, full of fire and righteous fury. And he made a mistake so catastrophic, so blinded by rage, that it would take him 27 years in a prison cell to understand what he had done wrong. Today, this is not the story of the man who walked free from prison. This is the story of the angry young revolutionary who almost guaranteed he would die there, forgotten and defeated. Because if you're watching this, perhaps you too are struggling with anger. Perhaps you feel the heat of injustice burning in your chest. Perhaps you believe, as he once did, that fury alone could set you free. Let me show you why he was so dangerously wrong. In those early years of apartheid, Mandela watched his people humiliated daily. He saw mothers forced to carry passes like criminals in their own land. He witnessed children denied education, fathers denied dignity, entire communities erased from maps as if they had never existed. And inside him, something hardened, something cold and sharp and desperate for release. He formed Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, in 1961. They began with sabotage, carefully targeting infrastructure, not people. But in his heart, he wanted to burn it all down. He gave speeches dripping with contempt for the oppressors. He wrote manifestos that drew lines in the sand. He genuinely believed that matching their violence with his violence was not just justified, it was inevitable, necessary, noble. He called it revolution. But if we're honest today, it was rage wearing a political mask. And here's what that rage cost him. In July 1963, police raided their hideout in Rivonia. They found documents, plans, evidence of everything they'd done and intended to do. He was captured, tried, and sentenced. But the real failure wasn't getting caught. The real failure was this. He had built a movement on anger. And anger, no matter how righteous, always burns out or burns everything around it. During the trial, he stood in that courtroom and delivered what many call a powerful speech. He spoke of ideals worth dying for, and he meant every word. But what he didn't yet understand was that ideals worth dying for must also be ideals worth living for, worth patience, worth strategy, worth swallowing your pride for decades, if that's what transformation requires. You see, rage has a fatal flaw. It feels like power, but it's actually surrender. When you're enraged, you've handed control to your enemy. They set the terms. They choose the battlefield. They dictate your emotional state with every injustice they commit. Mandela went to prison believing he was a warrior. He was actually a prisoner long before he entered that cell, locked in the cage of his own fury. 27 years is a long time to think, to sit with yourself, to watch your anger from a distance and finally see it for what it truly is. A young man's luxury, a spent resource, a strategy that had already failed. Now, let me tell you what he learned in that silence. Let me share with you the 3 steps that transformed him from an angry revolutionary into something far more dangerous to the apartheid regime, a man who refused to hate them. Step 1. He stopped reacting and started observing. In prison, Mandela studied his jailers, not with hatred, but with curiosity. He learned Afrikaans, their language. He read their history, their poetry, their fears, and slowly, he began to see them not as monsters, but as human beings trapped in their own prison of ideology and fear. This is not about forgiveness, not yet. This is about intelligence. You cannot defeat an enemy you do not understand, and you cannot understand anyone while you're screaming at them. When anger controls you, you see only what you want to see. You create caricatures. You miss opportunities. You mistake volume for victory. But when you observe with cold clarity, you find the cracks in their armor. You discover that many of your enemies are exhausted, conflicted, looking for a way out they accept without losing face. That is the gift rage steals from you, the ability to see the door you could walk through together. Step 2. He transformed his identity from victim to architect. This was the hardest lesson, because victimhood, even righteous victimhood, is seductive. It gives you moral clarity. It justifies your anger. It makes every failure someone else's fault. But it also makes you reactive, powerless, forever waiting for your oppressor to change before you can be free. Somewhere in year 9 or 10 of his imprisonment, Mandela had a realization that changed everything. He could not control what they did to him, but he could absolutely control who he became in response. He began to see himself not as Nelson Mandela prisoner, but as Nelson Mandela architect of the South Africa that would one day exist. He started building it in his mind, brick by brick. A nation where Afrikaner and African could live as equals, where old wounds could heal, where his jailer's grandchildren and his could call each other countrymen. And here's the profound truth he discovered. The moment you see yourself as an architect rather than a victim, your entire relationship to suffering changes. Pain becomes information. Injustice becomes evidence of a system that needs redesigning. Your enemy becomes someone who simply hasn't yet seen the blueprint you're creating. You stop asking. Step 3. He weaponized time itself. Rage wants immediate results. It cannot wait. It demands satisfaction now, revenge now, justice now. And that impatience is precisely why rage so often fails. Mandela learned to move at the pace of stone, wearing down underwater, invisible daily, undeniable across years. Every conversation with a guard, every letter carefully crafted, every negotiation conducted with patience that bordered on the inhuman. He wasn't being passive, he was being geological. There's a concept he came to embrace: strategic patience. This is not weakness. This is not giving up. This is understanding that some victories can only be won by someone willing to outlast their enemy's certainty. The apartheid regime expected him to emerge from prison either broken or full of vengeance, either outcome they could handle. What they couldn't handle was a man who emerged with a plan that included them in the future he was building. That was the ultimate power move. Not destroying your enemy, but making them irrelevant to your pain while inviting them to be relevant to your vision. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. My friends, the battlefield changes, but the principles remain eternal. You're angry because someone wronged you. That anger feels righteous. It feels like strength. It feels like you're honoring yourself by holding on to it. But ask yourself, has your anger changed them? Has it freed you? Or has it simply kept you tethered to the very person or system you're trying to escape? Rage makes you predictable. Your enemy knows exactly how to manipulate you. Simply trigger your anger and watch you sabotage yourself. You'll burn bridges you needed. You'll say things you can't take back. You'll make decisions from your lowest self, not your highest. But strategic patience, observation instead of reaction, building a new identity instead of defending an old wound, that makes you dangerous. That makes you free. That makes you someone your adversary cannot control because you've stopped letting them dictate your emotional state. I won't lie to you. The transformation was agonizing. There were nights in that cell when Mandela wanted to hate so badly, it physically hurt to choose differently. There were moments when patience felt like betrayal of everyone who had suffered. But slowly, he began to notice something. The guards who were cruelest were often the most afraid. The system that seemed all-powerful was actually fragile, held together by the assumption that they would always respond to violence with violence. The day he stopped giving them that justification was the day he truly became free, even behind bars. And when he finally walked out of prison in 1990, he did not emerge as a bomb ready to explode. He emerged as a bridge. Not because he was soft, not because he forgave easily, not because he forgot what had been done, but because he understood something rage never teaches you. The most powerful way to defeat your enemy is to transform them into your ally, or at least into someone too confused to keep fighting. He made choices that bewildered both his supporters and his opponents. He extended his hand to those who had tried to break it. He spoke their language, honored their humanity, and invited them into a future they didn't think possible. None of that was possible from the man he was at 34. That man would have won the battle and lost the country. So let me translate this into a framework you can use, starting tomorrow. First, when you feel rage rising, pause. Just 5 seconds. In that pause, ask yourself, is this anger revealing truth, or is it clouding my vision? Am I about to react in a way that gives my adversary exactly what they expect? Second, study the person or system frustrating you, not to justify them, but to understand them. What are they afraid of? What do they need that they're not getting? Third, build your future identity. Not the angry, wounded version of yourself, but the architect. Who do you want to be on the other side of this? And finally, embrace the long game. Real power isn't loud. Real power is the patience to wait for your enemy to exhaust themselves while you grow stronger in the silence. Now, my friends, we're at a crucial point in this journey together. If what I'm sharing resonates with you, if you're ready to transform your rage into something more powerful, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Because this conversation is just beginning. There are more lessons, more strategies, more stories of how ordinary people can turn their deepest failures into their greatest strength. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and commit to walking this path with me. Because transformation is not a solo journey. We need community. We need reminders. We need to hear these truths again and again until they become part of who we are. You know, one of the most misunderstood aspects of his story is this idea that he simply... Let me be clear. Nelson Mandela was not a saint. He was a man who learned the hard way that sainthood was never the goal. Effectiveness was the goal. Freedom was the goal. Building something that would outlast his pain was the goal. There were days on the island when he felt such rage he could barely breathe. Days when he wanted to give in to bitterness, to let it consume him entirely. It would have been so much easier. But he realized something. Every day he spent angry was a day he wasn't building. Every hour he spent planning revenge was an hour he wasn't planning reconstruction. And his people, his beautiful suffering people, they didn't need his anger. They needed his clarity. They needed a future they could believe in. They needed proof that you could walk through hell and come out still human, still capable of hope, still willing to extend your hand to those who had tried to break it. That was the real victory, not over the apartheid regime, but over the part of him that wanted to become like them in his quest to defeat them. Let me give you a practical example from his life that might illuminate this better. There was a particular guard who went out of his way to make Mandela's life miserable. Small cruelties, daily humiliations, the kind of psychological warfare designed to break you slowly. The old Nelson, the 34-year-old revolutionary, would have met cruelty with defiance, would have found ways to resist, to fight back, to make this man's life as difficult as he made him. But the Nelson he was becoming? He decided to do something that felt almost unbearable. He studied this man. He learned about his family, his fears, his own place in a system that was breaking him just as surely as it was breaking Mandela, only in different ways. And one day he asked him about his son who was sick. Just a simple question, human to human. He watched something crack in the guard's face. For just a moment, he saw Mandela not as a prisoner number, but as someone who cared about his pain. 2 years later, this same guard became one of his most reliable allies inside that prison. Not because Mandela defeated him, but because he refused to see him as only his enemy. That's what strategic patience looks like in practice. It's not passive, it's not weak, it's the active choice to see complexity where rage only sees targets. Now, let's talk about what happened after he was released, because this is where the real test came. Imagine, you've spent 27 years in prison. Your best years, stolen. Your family, fractured. Your body, aged beyond its years. You emerge to find the people who did this to you still in power, still living comfortable lives, still asking for your patience while they negotiate how much freedom to give you. Every fiber of your being wants justice, wants them to feel what you felt, wants the world to see them punished as you were punished. And then you make a choice that everyone thinks is insane. You sit down with them as equals. You have conversations about shared concerns, about building a future together. You find common ground where everyone assumed there could only be a chasm. This wasn't weakness. This was the most calculated, cold-blooded strategy Mandela ever employed. Because he understood something crucial. He couldn't build a new South Africa on the foundation of revenge. Revenge would just reset the cycle. Revenge would make his children's generation inherit his anger. He had to break the cycle, and the only way to break it was to refuse to continue it. Does that mean he forgot? No. Does it mean he didn't feel the anger? Absolutely not. It means he chose not to let that anger define the future he was building. And here's the part that applies to you, wherever you are in your journey right now. You have a choice in this moment. You can nurse your wounds, catalog your grievances, build your identity around what was done to you. That's a valid choice. Many people make it. Or you can do the harder thing. Acknowledge the pain, honor it, learn from it, and then deliberately, consciously, choose to build something that doesn't require your enemy's destruction to succeed. That second path is lonelier. People will misunderstand you. They'll call you weak, naive, a sellout. They'll say you're betraying those who suffered alongside you. But you'll be free in a way they never will be, because your peace, your power, your future won't depend on anyone else's downfall. It will belong entirely to you. As we near the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with one final thought. The mistake Mandela made at 34 wasn't fighting apartheid. It wasn't standing up against injustice. It wasn't even the violence, though he came to reject that path. The mistake was believing that anger could be the foundation of anything lasting. Anger is rocket fuel. It can launch you off the ground, give you that initial explosive energy, but it burns out quickly. What he learned is that transformation, real transformation, requires a different fuel, vision, purpose, a clarity about where you're going that's more powerful than your bitterness about where you've been. That's the shift from, it's the difference between fighting against something and building towards something. One exhausts you, the other sustains you for decades. So here's my challenge to you. Today, tomorrow, this week, find one place where you're operating from anger. Just one. It might be a relationship, a job situation, a political stance, a family wound. And ask yourself, what am I fighting against here? What would I be building toward instead? How would the architect version of me approach this differently than the angry victim version? You don't have to change everything today. You don't have to forgive anyone you're not ready to forgive. You don't have to let go of legitimate anger and legitimate injustice. But you do have to decide, is this anger serving my future, or is it preserving my past? When he stood outside that prison, his hand raised, his spirit somehow still intact, Mandela felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vindication, not even relief. He felt responsibility. The weight of everyone who had suffered, everyone who was watching, everyone who needed proof that suffering doesn't have to make you cruel. And he thought about that young man he was, so certain that rage was righteousness, so convinced that matching their violence was the only honorable path. And he forgave him, that angry 34-year-old revolutionary who nearly destroyed everything. He forgave him because he didn't know yet what Mandela had learned, that the longest distance between 2 points is rage, and the shortest distance is patience that looks like weakness until suddenly it's checkmate. My friends, failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the entry fee. The question is never whether you'll fail, make mistakes, lose yourself in anger for a season. The question is, will you let those failures teach you, or will you let them trap you? Mandela spent 27 years in prison. but he spent every year since teaching one simple truth. The person who can control their response to injustice controls the future. Not the person with the most rage, not the person with the loudest voice. The person with the patience to outlast everyone's expectations and emerge with their humanity intact. That person wins everything worth winning. If this resonated with you, remember, subscribe to this channel. Join this community of people who are choosing transformation over revenge, building over burning. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to go deeper into the strategies that turned his greatest failure into his greatest strength. We're going to walk this path together. Because you're not alone in your anger. You're not alone in your pain. And you're not alone in your desire to become something more than your wounds. Mandela walked this path. It can be walked. And on the other side, freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind that requires your enemy's destruction, but the kind that exists regardless of what anyone else does or doesn't do. That's the freedom I want for you. Until we speak again, remember this. Your anger is information, not identity. Your pain is real, but it doesn't have to be permanent. And the future you're building is always more important than the past you're avenging. Walk well, my friends. Walk with patience. Walk with purpose. Walk free.